Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever. Today is Monday, January 19th, and we are pleased to continue with a series of conversations we're having with local state representatives and state senators. Last week we had in State Representatives Kathleen James and Rob Hunter from the Bennington 4 District, and today it's a real pleasure to welcome to the studio Sandy Pinsonault, who represents the district that includes the towns of Dorset, Danby, Landgrove, Peru, and Mount Tabor, and also David Durfee, whose district includes the town of Shaftesbury and the other part of Sunderland that is not in Kathleen and Rob's district. So, Sandy, Dave, thank you very much for making the time to be here today and bring us up to speed on what you're seeing is going on in the state legislature, which got back into action about, 2 weeks or so ago. And from all accounts, is going to be an interesting session. I guess they all are kind of interesting in one way or another, but seems to be a lot on the agenda, on the plate for you all to be working on this year. And I thought we'd start off with the subject that seems to be the one that's garnering the most attention so far anyway. We've got a way to go, but education reform was a big topic last year, and by the end of the session, you had produced Act 73, the statute that the governor signed, I guess was in June, after a little extra time there, overtime session. But then, I guess the redistricting task force that was going to come up with 3 maps or whatever to show how the state would be divided into different districts, education districts, came up instead with a recommendation that school districts may want to pursue voluntary mergers, and it had a few other ideas. So I guess my first question to get things started is, where do we stand? What's next? What do you anticipate how the legislature is going to move? Could you just make maps of your own, for instance? David, let me start with you here on that one. Do you think there's an amendment path also to Act 73 to kind of keep it moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer your question about can the legislature make its own maps, yes, certainly. And the task force was really always going to be doing nothing more than proposing maps, and there was nothing that they didn't have any authority to put any kind of a map into law. That would always have been the legislature's job. So the legislature can still move ahead if it can reach a consensus on what a new statewide map of school districts would look like, and it simply just doesn't have the the benefit of a recommended map from the commission. I should say that there is a point of view that says, well, the commission did come up with a map having to do with BOCES
Right.
districts, which I think is true, but it's a little bit different than what I think the legislature and the governor were envisioning when we passed Act 73 and created the commission and said, come up with no more than 3 maps.
And those BOCES it's like bringing together administrative structures to kind of bring to reduce costs, so that each supervisory union wouldn't need to have all the office folks and administrative personnel, but rather there could be a group of them from just combine them, and that would be some cost savings there. Well, Sandy, what's your takeaway on where things stand and what should happen next?
Well, I agree with Dave that their task was to come up with 3 maps, and they unsuccessfully did that. I know that the Education Committee at this point is working on a map or 2 for us to review. We have to start someplace, and hopefully that will happen sooner than later in this session. There's a lot to be worked out. It was never the intent of the governor to close schools. He wanted that to be up to the districts themselves and the supervisory unions. On that note, I think our district has done a phenomenal job at reducing costs and combining and facing the ugly scenario of having to close schools. It's too costly to function a school with 50 or less students, the overhead and everything else that goes into a school budget. So on that note, I think we in our district have done very good and should be made as an example of for the rest of the state to follow and to look at. But we got a long road ahead of us, and hopefully everybody will come to some sort of agreement. There's going to be some likers and some haters, but we'll see what happens.
No, so always you're never going to get everybody on the same.
No, you can't please everybody all the time. That's right.
Unfortunately. I mean, one idea that I think Senator Phil Baruth came up with as a sort of a temporary measure to kind of control the costs of education in the state would be to freeze education spending for, I think, 2 years. Do you think that is a good approach to, at least in the short term? It doesn't really tackle the long-term issues in play, but for the immediate moment, just to keep property taxes at a certain level, is that going to be a good idea?
I not quite sure of the timing, but I think his proposal was to take effect not this year,
Right.
but the
Next
following
year,
year.
yeah.
And I think that one of the, to my mind anyway, unintended consequences of that kind of an approach would be that it would incentivize school districts right now who are in the final stages of passing budgets for next year to say, oh, well, if they're going to be frozen the year after that, then let's maybe spend a little more than we would have otherwise this year. There are districts around the state who have the capacity to do that, the taxing capacity to do that, and might say, okay, if that's the way things are going to work, then I'm going to sort of come on in here while we have a chance. And I don't think anybody wants to see that happen. Certainly we have to applaud the idea of trying to do something in the short term before we get to Act 73's impacts, which wouldn't start for another 2 years anyway. So there is the question of what do we do this year as we're building our budgets, and then what do we do the next year, and then if the foundation formula moves forward, that's a mechanism for keeping costs from continuing to grow by leaps and bounds more than inflation, as they have been. I think that we've heard that over the past 5 years, school spending has gone up 35 to 40%, depending on what number you're looking at. I think inflation has certainly been high. We shouldn't forget that. Inflation has been unusually high, but I think it's been more like 24%, say. So school spending has gone up much more than inflation in the past few years, and that is what we would hope with a foundation formula, or something similar to the foundation formula. I'm not sure that's the most accurate term for it, but something that would keep costs from growing more than inflation every year.
And your thoughts on that, Sandy?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the formula, the foundation formula is probably the best way to go. I think the money should follow the student to wherever that student decides to go to school. And I think that in the overall picture of things, I think we need to look at the career technical centers, the independent schools. All of those have to be looked at and not just chopped away trying to save money someplace. The overall picture is, it's just the whole view of the whole thing is just more than I thought it would ever be. I was on the school board when Act 60 came in, and I thought it was a nightmare then, and that was supposed to save us lots of money, and that has not, and it's just been an increase from that point on. And then when they did the school consolidations, that was supposed to save money. That proved not to. So the overall hope is that Act 73 is going to save us some money. It might not look like it in the beginning, but hopefully overall it will have its lasting effects, and we can be where we need to be. And hopefully our school scores will get better. That's the most important thing, and offer kids everything, an opportunity that they need, and not just in certain areas. So
But one of the big cost drivers, as I understand it anyway, is like healthcare, health benefits for teachers and employees. I mean, that's kind of beyond the control of a lot of school boards, isn't it? I would have
There's a
thought.
lot that's beyond the control of school boards, and certainly health insurance costs have gone up, and then for ourselves, and then the employees of school districts are also paying much more than they have in the past, and school districts are picking up those costs too. So yeah, I mean, when you look at what's within the control of a school board, for example, you have to have a certain number of teachers in the building. You have to have a certain amount of administration. Personnel costs are, of course, the biggest cost of education. There's no state construction aid, so you're trying to do your maintenance and keep up with that. There's not a lot that's really within the control of local boards these days.
then you got transportation costs and the lack of bus drivers and transport. So everybody's trying to pull from one department to another to get students to school or home. And then you've got the whole issue. The healthcare issue is probably the biggest expense that the school boards are all facing, because that just continues to rise again in Vermont. Not only anywhere else, but Vermont seems to be on the high end of healthcare costs. So there's a lot of, and then you get the weighted students, the students that have special needs and special services that they need. So then that costs, and then that's out of the control, because a lot of that's federal money that we keep getting cut from. So sometimes their hands are tied in some points. I mean, there's certain things they can help cut down on, and then there's other things that they just can't.
So it sounds like then the best solution would have to come from the top, right? You could say, well, here's how much money you got, and spend more. I don't know. That comes out of the local bucket in some way or another, I guess. Just before we move on from education, because there's so many aspects to this question, we could easily spend our entire time here just talking about the ins and outs of that. But you both mentioned the foundation formula a moment ago, and I guess I just wondered, for folks who might not be familiar with that, that's each student would bring with it a certain amount of money that the schools would get. I've heard $15,000, $16,000 roughly is one area, one range. But what about what happens if that's not enough for a school to kind of make a go of it? I mean, I know some students would bring a little bit more than that, with the weights, because they're harder to educate for one reason or another. English is their second language or whatever, but is the foundation formula, I know it's used in a lot of other states across the country, so it must be workable, but you think it would be a good transition, a reasonably easy transition to go to that here?
I think what we're envisioning is, although we're calling it a foundation formula, is not necessarily the same thing that other states have used. Because in a nutshell, Vermont has a statewide education and system and a statewide education finance system. So in other states, the state is contributing something that sets a foundation, and then individual districts say, we want to spend this much more. And here the idea is more like everyone's going to get whatever the dollar amount is per pupil, per weighted pupil, and it's a number that has been hopefully agreed. This is enough money, provided that you don't have, provided that you are working in an efficient environment. So that might mean not a lot of small school buildings, for example, that small school buildings with small classes that have higher overhead and more staff for students. And I think that that's where the maps come back in, because by saying you're only going to get this much, it's enough if you have a big enough district with big enough buildings. But if you only have what many school districts have today, it might not be enough. And the commission was saying, well, voluntary mergers then would work, possibly, and that's true, I'm sure, in some cases, but maybe not all cases.
Well, that's, again, as I said at the start, it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out. But let's just move on to sort of the corollary to all of this, and that's the whole property tax question. 2 years ago, voters expressed their profound unhappiness about the rate at which property taxes were going up. And my understanding is that, the anticipation is that left untouched, property taxes will go up another 12% this year, but the governor is proposing taking $75 million of surplus revenues to buy that down a little bit. That still probably leaves us with a 7, 8, or 9% property tax increase, and obviously we can't keep doing that year after year. But what is the alternative to our system at the moment, where each individual town has its own property tax rate and stuff? Can we go in a different direction that would sort of, keep those rates stable, or are we waiting to hear?
Yeah, that's the big question, the big elephant in the room, because it all relates back to affordability, and it all goes back to our school tax. And our school tax is what's the high driver of our property, of our expenses, of our property tax. If you compare your municipal tax to your education tax on your tax bill, it's astounding the percentage of the difference. I think it's going to be real difficult. It's like a catch-22. Everything's related. You got housing. We have a housing issue, and we've got a taxation issue, and then we have an education issue. But they all tie into each other. We need more students to help cut down costs of education, but we don't have housing, so we need more housing, and then that would bring up the grand list, so that would help lower taxes as well. But then our environmental clauses are so strict that we are not we're so environmentally protective that we have so many restrictions on where people can build and not build, and acreage rules and all that. So it's all ties back to the one thing. It's like, where do we want to go? What's our overall picture of Vermont? Because it's not what it was 10, 15 years ago. So I think we need to really look at the big picture and figure out what's our future, because the taxes are going to chase people out of here.
I think that, if there's one thing that politicians across the spectrum and policy experts all agree, is that and it's not just in Vermont, we don't have enough housing. We don't have enough homes for people to live in. And I think we've gotten to the point in Vermont where there's enough agreement that we have started to do tangible things, and we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars, quite a lot of money. We've reformed some of the permitting requirements, and they're taking other steps that will incentivize housing through last year passing of the CHIP program, which maybe we can talk about in a little bit. Mm-hmm. Although that's a last year thing, but it just beginning to roll out now. But I think that one thing we could do, just to what can we do to affect the system right now, and Act 73 sort of paves the way for this, is creating a new property tax category for second homes or vacation homes. And particularly, I think we're looking at homes that sit empty for much of the year, and those we can take a good look, I think, this year at taxing those at a higher rate than they have been otherwise. And this is separate from commercial businesses. So right now we lump in rental property, second homes, commercial businesses are all one tax rate. The idea here is we want to hold renters harmless from any changes we might make, and businesses that are not involved with rentals, but second homeowners who are taking an increasing amount of property and basically houses off the market for residents, maybe that should be a higher tax rate.
Well, speaking of housing, definitely a topic I wanted to talk about. It's been an issue around the state for a long time. I'm trying to think, 20, 25 years perhaps. We've been talking about homes, but how do we incentivize developers to go forward and build more homes, particularly in the affordable workforce category? And Sandy, maybe we just turn to you here because in Dorset right now, your neighbors are looking at a proposal to put a fairly large number of housing units up on Raptor Lane, 300-acre parcel that the town has acquired. But I know that idea has run into a certain amount of controversy and pushback in the community too. I guess I just wonder, do you think that approach, that model, is one that would be useful or could be expanded across the state, or some of the issues that are being brought up about it, kind of make that problematic?
Yeah, I think Dorset has a great opportunity to have some housing. Of the 300 acres, I believe it's less than 100 of the acres is going to be used. The number of houses at this point is not completely cast in stone as to how many can actually fit. But it's a start, and I think the CHIP program would certainly help that. And the town owns the land and has the infrastructure there because it was a pre-approved development, a large development, 8 and 13 acres, or 8 lots with like large chunks of land. So not all of it will be developed. It'll still maintain the recreation trails and bike trails and everything that it's fostered over the last few years. But it will certainly, it won't be low-income housing, and it'll be hopefully workforce affordable housing, and with some duplexes, some condos, some single-family homes. The opposition, I don't quite understand. It's not, nobody's going to see it. It's not like it's right on the road and you're going to have to drive by and see all this cluster housing. Right. It's up on the side of the hill where nobody's going to see it unless you drive up there and take a ride around the neighborhood. So there's a lot of misinformation out there right now about it. So hopefully people will attend the Zoom meeting or in person this week. And I think they've got another one scheduled for February to get more informed. I know the town manager, Rob Giotti, has put a lot of hard work into this, as well as the select board. And it's a start. We need housing here. I know there was a while ago, they said like in the 90s, J.K. Adams had 100 employees and 99 of them lived in Dorset. And now they have like 5 or less than 5. So, and they all commute from the Granville, New York area, so, or other areas. So we need something. There's nothing here that our children in their mid-20s to early 30s can afford here. We don't have the workforce jobs that pay, 6-digit figures to afford a $500,000 or $600,000 home. So
what can the state do to kind of help that out? I mean, the developers, they're faced with high construction costs and labor costs and workforce issues of one sort or another. I mean, is there something that the state can do, either in terms of maybe permitting or some of the rules around what you can build and where you can build, that would ease that up or make that go faster?
So the CHIP program that we've mentioned a couple of times is, I think, likely to have a big impact.
And you'll have to remind me what the acronym CHIP stands for.
Community,
I was frantically trying to remember
Community
it.
Housing
Investment Program.
Yeah, community housing
CHIP,
investment.
Yeah,
Right.
It's a sort of a variation on the tax incremental financing, or TIF, which is used in Vermont and in other states, in cities mostly, or larger towns, to promote development. And the basic idea is the town will build some infrastructure, and that might be like expanding a water line or a sewage treatment line, wastewater, and then to attract a private developer. So it's not the town doing the building, except for the infrastructure. And then the developers also able to take advantage of a tax incentive. So for the first X number of years, I'm not sure how many years it might be, 10 or 20, any additional value in the property is not taxed. So if they buy the land and it costs $1,000 an acre, I'm sure it costs more in Dorset, and they build on it, then the additional cost of the improved property is not taxed. So the idea is that that provides enough of an incentive for somebody to come in and.
Okay. Yeah. Because it's hard to see kind of what the state can actually do to kind of incentivize developers to kind of short of just giving them money. I guess.
Well, giving them money is like not necessarily cash, but tax credits that's historically been the way that Vermont, and I think probably other places too, have promoted housing. But in a free market, in a capitalist system, unless we're going to have all housing is owned by the government, that's hands are tied somewhat.
Right. Well, let's move over to healthcare and health insurance. We touched upon that briefly there earlier, but I mean, it seems like in general the picture around the state in terms of healthcare is a little concerning. I mean, the hospital over in Brattleboro is going through some financial difficulties. There are other hospitals around the state that are seemingly struggling. A lot of fingers being pointed at the UVM Health Center as being a cost driver. And insurance costs, Blue Cross Blue Shield in Vermont is also between a rock and a hard place or whatever. Is there any pieces of legislation that you're aware of kind of gathering some momentum to kind of address some of those concerns, or are we still kind of in the information gathering stage?
Well, I think that there are steps being taken, and so in Vermont, the hospitals are all highly regulated by the Green Mountain Care Board, and I think we're starting to see now in the past year there's been some turnover in the board, and they're taking a harder stance. Typically, hospitals would submit a budget request, and the board would look at it, and then they might say, cut it by 20%, or in a more extreme case, cut it in half. And that just hasn't cut it. We've gotten now to a point where the hospital budgets are just, and they drive insurance rates, basically. I mean, the hospitals are passing their costs on to insurance companies who pass them on to us through our rates. So we did a couple of things last year to try and nibble away at it a little bit, but the reality is that most Vermonters get their health insurance either through a federal Medicaid or Medicare, or they work for an employer that we can't regulate because they're basically running their own insurance, self-funded insurance. So there's only about, I think, 1 in 6 Vermonters have insurance that we can do anything about as legislators. So it's a challenge in an aging state where so many people are on Medicare and have, obviously, as we get older, our health needs tend to increase. Yeah.
I don't know why it works that way. But
Yeah.
It should be the other way around, right? Well, it's going to be interesting to follow that one. I guess one idea that Treasury Secretary Mike Pichek has floated is the state joining a group of other states to get a discount card on drug prices. On the surface, it sounds like, well, why not? But
who's going to pay for it?
Okay. So, I mean, how would it work? I guess I don't really fully understand exactly. People would, buy these discount cards, and then when they go to the pharmacy or whatever, they would show them to the person, and they get percentage off the price of the pills or drugs?
They was just talking about it this past week, and I've only heard bits and pieces from different people in the committee. But I think that they were actually going to be given the cards, that there's no cost to the cards, and then you would get the discount. But the big question is, who's going to pay for it? Is it Medicaid or Medicare that's going to pick up the cost of the prescription discount? Which again, this will get passed on to the people who have insurance, because somebody's got to cover that cost. I think, like Dave said, our biggest downfall right now is that our average age in Vermont is 70 plus. So,
Right.
yeah, so we're a high aging population. So until we get younger families that can come in here and help bring those costs down, there's got to be a better ratio than the average of 70. The average of 40 would be great, but that's going to take a while.
So at the risk of opening up a gigantic can of worms, but I will anyway, how do we do that then? What would need to happen to attract younger families to move here or to stay here? The state has tried a couple of, I remember pre-COVID, there were programs that were designed to pay the moving costs of people who were coming here to take jobs. I'm not sure if that's still in place or not. I mean, it attracted a certain amount of criticism during that time. Then the pandemic came along, and all of a sudden we had all these people moving here from, some of the major metropolitan areas nearby. And but now the pandemic's over, and a lot of them went back to New York, Boston, or wherever they were living before. What would it take to move the population of the state upwards and have this being a place where folks in their 20s, 30s, or 40s will see, that's a place I want to live?
I think that program may still exist, but it was never a big driver of population change or population growth. But I think, as we've been talking about earlier, having housing, and it's not just bringing people into Vermont, but it's keeping the people we already have. We all know, we hear, I think, as legislators, very often, stories of people who their kids would like to stay, or they would like to stay, but they can't find an affordable place to live, and they don't want to live with their parents until they're 40 or whenever. So we're losing. It's not just that we're not having new people move to the state. I think lots of people want to move to the state. And in fact, we know, as we talked about earlier, there are lots of people who want to spend some time in the state, not necessarily living here, but have some property here. So I think that we want to be thinking about the housing, obviously. Can we do more to support families who want to, folks who want to become parents? We had bipartisan legislation last year that increased the child tax credit, so making it a little bit more affordable for families who do have children. We have, for years, I think we've had the lowest fertility rate of any state in the country. Not just because we're older, but just because our population of in the parenting age just doesn't have as many children. And I think that's partly, there's lots of reasons for that, but one is certainly affordability. It costs something to have a child, and so when we can do something to help with that, I think that's good. And we want to have safe neighborhoods. We want to have good schools. We want to have secure employment opportunities to attract new families in, but also keep the ones who are here, Vermonters, from going somewhere else.
Well, that leads me then just to one of our last couple of questions here. The governor is going to be delivering a state of the budget message. I think, is it this week or next week?
It's this week, Wednesday.
Pretty soon.
Yeah, I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday.
This week.
This
Yeah.
week, okay.
Yeah.
And last week he delivered the state of the state message, which focused a lot around education. The state budget, I guess, is looking like it's going to be a pretty tight squeeze this year. Is that an accurate perception?
I think it's going to be. I think we have to really look at the picture of where we're spending money in every aspect, every line item has to be looked at, and see if there's any way we can cut a little bit off everything, because of the cost. Because we certainly can't afford to have another 12% increase this year and another 12% next year and continue the path we're on. So it'll be interesting to see what he proposes and see what appropriations does with it and all the requests that come to. I'm in GovOps, and we've had some committee or some organizations coming in with different proposals this year, but they're not asking for any money. They're talking about what their goals are, but so far no increases, which is good. So I think they're all feeling it.
There's not a lot of fat to be cut.
There's not a lot of fat to be cut.
Yeah.
No.
Well, Dave, I know you had a conversation that sort of touched on this point. I guess last week or whenever you had some folks from the Vermont Food Network came
food security.
in and were looking for
Yeah.
a little bit of a uptick in what the legislature could offer, and
Yeah.
yeah, while that would be a worthy cause, it may not be possible to help them to the degree that they were looking to be helped, I guess.
I think there's a couple of things that are happening at the same time. One is we don't have the surplus coming into the year that we have had in the past, and the economists just met with the legislature and the governor on Friday. They do that twice a year and say, here's our forecast going forward. And I think every year since the pandemic, when they've had their January meeting, they've come out with good news. So they say, things are still going strong. We expected things to slow down. They haven't. We're going to bump up our, forecast or our projection a little bit. And this year they didn't do that. This is the first time in some time that that's the case. That's a little worrisome. But then we also have, looking into next year, cuts in the federal cuts that are probably going to have an impact on our budget. So food security SNAP benefits is one, administering that program. Medicaid would be, of course, another and a big one. So there's that pressure too, that if we did have any money to beyond what has already been budgeted in the base budget, we want to be just mindful that there may be programs that are being cut that we do want to support as Vermonters, and that ought to be first. So food security is, along with making sure that people have shelter, making sure they have food, very important. And we've seen, I think we've all heard these stories too about the food shelves becoming, more and more for so many more people, sort of the source of their nutrition. And the food bank has come in and asked for, for example, for an increase in funding so that it can be ready. And they're the main statewide organization. They work with food shelves all around the state. So that might be something that the state can help out with. But it will be finite and more limited than it probably should be. But that's the world we're in at the moment.
It doesn't sound like it's going to be as much fun as it was 4 or 5 years ago when there was all
No,
that
it'd be nice to have
federal
a
money floating
surplus
around.
to be able to say, oh, we're going to give you a little bit extra, we're going to give you, but what we're doing is the surplus is just trying to balance the budget.
Right.
And that's not good.
And I think that we always have a balanced budget. That's not written into law, it's not in the Constitution, but it's what we've done in Vermont historically with, I think, again, bipartisan support for that idea that we're not going to spend more than what we have. And we have not had to raise taxes to do that in recent years. Property taxes are, the voters are deciding on that, but we haven't raised like tax rates. The sales tax is what it has been. The income tax is what it has been.
Right. Right.
I think last year's budget was a good indicator of the bipartisan work that everybody's doing. Is the governor came in here, the request came in here, and they met, which was really good. Where it's always just the opposite. But it really came out to be a very good bipartisan budget last year with a lot of giving and taking. So
Hopefully that's what will happen again, I guess. But it's an election year this time, so the dynamics may be different. Well, one last question before I let you both go. Dave, you're the chair of the Agriculture Committee. Sandy, you're on the Government Operations Committee. I guess anything unusual or in particular that you're following that's kind of bubbling up that you think your committees may have to tackle? Dave, agriculture, I mean, is there anything that's going to be newsworthy that we'll want to know about?
Yeah. I don't know how newsworthy it will be. Sometimes things that we think are fascinating
Turn out to be not so much, huh?
rise to the level of, the public is interested in this.
I don't get it.
Something that will probably actually be in both our committees this year is a state Supreme Court decision last spring that nullified, I guess is probably the best word to use, decades of understanding conventional wisdom on the ability of municipalities to regulate farming within their town limits. So the law has always been understood to be towns can't do that, that if you want to farm, the towns can't have zoning restrictions or ordinances that that restrict farming. And the court ruled on a case from up north saying actually they didn't see it that way. So we're working on some changes, some fixes to that to basically bring us back to the status quo, although I will say that not everyone at the municipal government level sees it quite the same way that the agriculture community sees it. So we're working to find a compromise that Vermont has historically been obviously an agricultural state. Farming is, I think, very important to the economy, to our collective sense of who we are, and I suspect that at the end of the day we'll come up with something that is does not end up restricting or reducing farming. If there are any restrictions, it might be like in the middle of a city, in the middle of a town.
Okay. And over in government operations, anything?
Nothing really pressing at this point. We're working on a few charter changes for a couple different towns in the state. Working on a land purchasing fraudulent bill, since there's been some towns that have seen some fraudulent land deals. So we're working on that. That's in the very early stages. Working on a couple of military bills as well. So nothing that's going to make world news, that's for sure.
But important stuff.
Yes, very important stuff.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, I guess we'll leave it there for today, but we may need to have you back at some point to give us the update.
Happy to come back.
Where things wind
when
up.
Some stuff happens.
But anyway, for now, thanks again to Representatives Sandy Pinsonault and David Durfee, who are sharing their insights with us. And thanks to all of you who have been with us as well. I hope you found the program interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Next week, we hope to have here with us State Senators Seth Bongartz and Rob Plunkett, and we'll hear what their perspective is from the other side of the hallway, I guess you way to put it, right? All right. Take care. Thank you very much.